Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting TIES webinar. My name is Kenny Coogan, the education coordinator for the Center for Inquiry. We have three education programs for K through 12 educators, which I will tell you about after Alyssa's presentation. And welcome to our annual series of webinars through the Teacher Institute for Evolutionary Science. We hold them every year during the school year. And yesterday we had an excellent talk by Alyssa's friend Michael, and he highly recommended you, Alyssa. And we are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Kenny. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to send Mike Gervin an email as soon as I'm done with my talk this afternoon. And he is actually cited in this talk, and he was cited in this talk before I ever knew that he gave a talk before me. So it is a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon for me, and evening for you. I'm coming to you from Las Vegas, Nevada. And the title of my talk today is The Evolution of Cooperation, What We Can Learn from Hadza Hunter-Gatherers. And Kenny has graciously agreed slash been pressed into service in order to help me advance my slides. So apologies for not being able to do that myself, but thank you, Kenny. Appreciate that. Just a little background on me, just to give you sort of a bit of an orientation on my perspective and my history. I grew up in the Bay Area. In California, Northern California. I grew up outside of San Francisco in a town called Mountain View. Oh, and we have this strange block that keeps coming onto the screen. So we're gonna do our best, and we're gonna talk around it. Oh, Kenny fixed it. Um, I earned my bachelor's in anthropology from UC Santa Cruz, go banana slugs, and my doctoral degree in anthropology from UC San Diego. I then went on to do a postdoctoral fellowship in cellular and molecular medicine from the School of Medicine on a project that had to do with diet composition and sialic acid. So if you have questions about diet, I can certainly answer those after my talk. My training is in anthropology, in human evolutionary biology, and in ecology. And what I'll be talking to you about today mostly is much of the work that I have done with a group of hunter-gatherers called the Hadza. They're a group of hunter-gatherers or foragers, and they reside in Tanzania, in one of the countries in East Africa, and I have worked with them since 2004. My research areas are predominantly birth practices, child rearing, cooperation, and nutrition. Next slide, please, Kenny. Just to give you a bit of a roadmap to what we're going to be talking about today, so I can try and keep myself on time so that we have some time to really talk about if you have any questions so that I can be sure to answer them for you. The evolutionary underpinnings of cooperation is what we're going to just right out of the starting gate. We're going to talk about that. We're going to move into the cooperative breeding hypothesis, talk about the community with whom I'm privileged enough to work, and then talk about a couple of individual studies that support the foundations of cooperation and well-being as a hallmark of our species. And finally, we'll end with some lessons about what we can learn from the Hadza in our present day lives. Next slide, please. So starting out with the evolutionary underpinnings of cooperation, humans are arguably one of the most biologically successful species on the planet. Our success may be linked with our extraordinary ability to cooperate with one another. And while cooperation is observed in many other species, many other animal species, human cooperation is both anomalous in nature and scale. So we form long-lasting ties with both genetically related and unrelated individuals, which is really rather unusual. And this cooperation is linked with human reproduction. So to interrogate this relationship and how it differs from that of great apes, we have to consider reproductive challenges that are faced by our ancestors and the larger social context in which they unfolded. So here I've listed some of the key evolutionary pathways with some citations listed on the slide if you're interested for kind of the foundational. There are hundreds and hundreds, hundreds of citations that go into each one of these bullet points, but I've just picked some of the most salient ones, some of the foundational citations there for you. And the bottom one from 2006 is one of my very favorite pieces written by Mike Gervin that has to do with cooperation. So the key evolutionary pathways can kin selection, which is essentially helping relatives spread your shared genes. Reciprocal altruism, which is I help you today, you help me tomorrow. Reputation and trust, where cooperation can earn status and partners. We'll talk about that. And group survival, which is a big one we'll talk about toward the end of the talk, which is that cohesive groups tend to outcompete selfish ones. Thank you. Around 7 million years ago, humans diverged from other great apes. So at some point in our evolutionary history, perhaps around the time when our genus Homo, evolved around 2 to 2.5 million years ago, we evolved a number of distinct features that are associated with reproduction and parenting. And humans are one of the only mammalian species that has long-term reproductive bonds. Though I will point out that does not mean that these are sexually or socially monogamous relationships, just that we do in fact form these long-term reproductive bonds. And we also allocate varying degrees of reproductive effort to our parental investment. In addition to these behaviors, female life history has several unique traits that help define Homo sapiens as a species. So, a comparative understanding of the reproductive trade-offs and challenges that a human mother faces and that our ancestors in the genus Homo would have faced can situate parenting and reproduction in an evolutionary framework. And therefore, it becomes a necessary first step to understanding cooperative breeding and a necessary step to understanding sort of the foundational underpinnings of cooperation and how cooperation is central to the story of our species. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is so unique about female life history? Female life history is how unique we are comparatively. The female of the species is really one of the things that brought me into evolutionary biology. It's one of the things that really captivated my attention as an early undergraduate student. And we know so much more now than we did 100 years ago when I was an undergrad. But it's really one of the things that really captured my interest, my imagination, and those burning questions that sort of keep you up at night. So human mothers have a distinct life history compared to other primates and to other great apes, other apes in general. Many aspects of our reproduction are different. We have a later age at first birth, with cross-cultural averages suggesting that this may be around 18 to 20 years old for many societies, and this is later than other species of primates. A later age at first reproduction permits slower growth over a longer period of time. So humans have what's referred to as a slow life history. And mammals with slow life histories like ours also tend to have larger bodies, which means that we're able to produce more energetically expensive infants. So what does that mean, energetically expensive? It means infants who are larger bodied and larger brains. And humans certainly fall into this category of larger bodied, larger brained, and give birth to comparatively large brained, large bodied infants. Despite this, human gestation time remains average compared to other primates. So many argue that human infants are something we call secondarily altricial, which means that our infants are relatively helpless when they're born, and a significant amount of postnatal growth happens outside of the womb. And some human biologists refer to this as the fourth trimester. Another characteristic that really makes us unique is, so we have these later age at first birth, we give birth to these infants that are, dependent upon us, and we have relatively short interbirth intervals. So we're going to talk about this in a minute. And a short interbirth interval really has a cascade effect. It's the shortened time between each birth. So we give birth to these large-brained, fairly helpless offspring who are dependent for a long period of time. And we also wean these infants earlier, long before they are nutritionally independent and can provision themselves. And weaning is a really big part of the story. Next slide, please. It's typical for species with slow life histories like ours to wean their infants later and increase the space between infant births. One of the ways in which human reproduction is unique is that we exhibit the opposite pattern. We wean our infants sooner comparatively, and we have that shortened or decreased space between births, that shortened interbirth interval. So most mammalian infants are weaned when their first permanent molar tooth erupts, or when their weight reaches approximately 1/3 of their mother's body weight. So for anyone who's been around a human infant, and seen any parent trying to carry an infant, this makes a lot of sense when you think about breastfeeding an infant who is 1/3 of their mother's body weight, right? So humans deviate from this pattern, and they wean their infants around 2 years of age. So long before they would reach this weight, right? Because you can imagine that would be pretty alarming and pretty big. So this incidentally would be around 7 years old in most populations, although there are some very renowned human biologists who do believe that we should be weaning our infants past this 2 years of age. But that tends to be the cross-cultural standard that we see around the world, is that tends to be the age at which most infants are weaned by that age. Early weaning allows for a decrease in the time between our offspring, so this short interbirth interval or IBI, and this allows moms to return to ovulation sooner. And this is outside of any prophylactics. This is outside of any birth control. And this, we're talking about sort of the evolutionary environment in which our species evolved. So mothers would return to ovulation sooner, begin reproducing again. And human moms thus have the ability to stack their infants, which means that they're responsible for multiple energetically expensive offspring who require different types and different degrees of investment, everything from nutritional provisioning to childcare. So weaning those infants early, while they are still nutritionally immature and cannot provide for themselves, has very important consequences for a human mother and had very important consequences for hominid mothers as we were evolving. And in fact, it is this foundation of female reproductive biology that leads us to sort of the tale we tell today. So how did hominid moms do this, right? How did we evolve a system that was so unusual like this, that essentially where you end up with multiple dependent, very energetically dependent, relatively helpless offspring that are now stacked and require different degrees of investment. So how did we solve this evolutionary problem? How did early moms do it? Thank you, Kenny. So the answer is that they did it with help. This form of child rearing and of reproduction is called cooperative breeding. And it's a reproductive system where group members other than the biological parents, sometimes called alloparents, or other than the biological mother, sometimes called allomothers, aid in the care and provisioning of young. So this is something that is not unusual really to any of us. We've all heard the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. It turns out that that has very deep evolutionary roots. And the use of this term, cooperative breeding, sort of this phrase that's used to highlight this aspect of human reproduction, was introduced by Sarah Hrdy in her book Mothers and Others, which was first published in 1999. Well, first it was Mother Nature, published in 1999, and then Mothers and Others was 10 years later in 2009. And many of us in my discipline use the term allomother to acknowledge the difference in maternal and paternal investment in our species, and that in our species, paternal investment does tend to be what we refer to as facultative in nature. So if you are interested in learning more about this and sort of the kind of foundational work that a lot of this is built on, I really encourage you to read Sarah's work. It's truly extraordinary and has been highlighted in many, many outlets and has been impactful far beyond human evolutionary biology and anthropology. So the cooperative breeding hypothesis proposes that apes with the life history attributes of Homo sapiens, right, of us, could not have evolved unless allomothers had help in caring for and provisioning for their young, right? These multiple dependent, energetically costly offspring they now have. More recently, many scholars have offered alternative terms to describe this human-specific pattern of cooperation and provisioning in the care of young, but the concept remains similar to the one proposed by Hrdy, regardless of what you call it, cooperative breeding, cooperative child rearing, distributed childcare, they're all really referring to the same thing. Next slide. The cooperative breeding hypothesis has essentially over the past several decades since Hertie published her work, has had an indelible impact on the scholarship being produced in a wide range of disciplines. So everything, as I indicated, from neuroscience to human biology to social psychology. Many scholars are now reframing the ways in which we think about the evolution of parenting in general and tethering it to the evolution of cooperation in light of this hypothesis. And much of my own work over the last 20 years has explored this hypothesis, learning more about who helps moms in different contexts and in different ecologies. Next slide. I love this quote. This really sums it up beautifully. To be human is to matter intensely to others. So the overarching takeaway is this sentiment that it's cooperative breeding which provides the architecture for security and connectedness and well-being in our species. And this is one approach, of course. There's no smoking gun in human evolutionary history and human evolutionary biology. But if there were one for me, if there were sort of one thing that I think is really foundational, one of the things that really characterizes our species, a true hallmark of human evolution, I think it is this cooperation. And it's not just in the bodies of the female of the species. We can also look to our infants. Human infants are biologically primed to expect connection. They are unbelievably responsive, and these very early relational environments. And what you're seeing here is an infant and a mother. This is a relational environment. It could be an allo mother. This is a relational environment. It's something that anthropologist David Lancy calls the mother ground, right? This is a relational environment. This is the first scaffolding of cooperation and well-being. Human infants are born into this big, rich, cooperative network that has very deep evolutionary roots. And it's really sort of the first stage of cooperation throughout our life history. Next slide. So I want to tell you a bit about the group with whom I work. I work with the Hadza. The word for themselves is Hadzabe. So the Hadzabe tribe of Tanzania. There are roughly 1,000 individuals who self-identify as Hadza. They reside in northern Tanzania. I'll show you a map momentarily. And they have what we refer to in the nutrition field as a mixed subsistence food economy, which means that they hunt and gather for a very large portion of their diet. Still today, even in 2025, I was just in Tanzania a few months ago. I was there doing a project over the summer, a project on nutrition and diet, and they're eating bush foods, wild foods, game meat, even in the most sort of market integrated camps that are closest to village centers. They are still foraging for a large portion of their diet. There's a strong sexual division of labor when they are targeting wild foods, where women tend to focus on plant foods and men tend to focus on animal products. So that would be wild game animals, honey. And children also contribute significantly to the household. If you ever want me to come back, I can talk about the evolution of childhood and what we've learned from Hadza kids about that particular life history stage. And spoiler alert, it also involves cooperation and distributed care and tethers to diet. There's a strong emphasis on cooperation in their community. And resource sharing is really seen as a form of social security and well-being. They have highly communal births and, again, as we mentioned, distributed childcare. And I will take a moment to talk to you about why, as an evolutionary biologist, I began working with the Hadza to begin with. And I think this is a really important point to make. And I may make it again at the end of the talk because I think it bears repeating. The Hadza are a contemporary population. They are a modern population, just as modern as you and I. That being said, there are aspects, there are elements of their lifestyle that are quite similar to the environments in which our species evolved. So they are one of the last groups that is still foraging for a large percentage of their diet. They are still semi-nomadic. They are still tracking against the seasons. They still live in grass huts. They are still living this highly communal lifestyle that characterized the vast majority of human evolutionary history. So this is why a lot of folks like myself who study these types of trying to find answers to these types of questions are really eager to go work with and among communities like the Hadza. Next slide. Thank you, Kenny. So you'll see a picture there of the beautiful Lake Eyasi Basin. That is in the rainy season. In the dry season, it is not green. In the dry season, it is very, very brown, very dusty. And you can see there on the pop-out map where they live. And on the next slide, I'll show you some of the foods that they target. Oh, just kidding, not quite yet. It's okay. No, yep, great. I guess my food's coming on the next one. Thanks, Kenny. So one of the important things about sort of the way that I'm framing the talk today in terms of what aspect of Hadza society, of Hadza biology, of Hadza nutrition, of Hadza behavior that we're really focusing on to inform our discussion today is really that infants are born into this web of care, which I showed you in one of the previous slides, that relational environment that infants are born into in general as a characteristic of our species. But in the Hadza community, this is absolutely central to their way of life. Pregnancy and childbirth are not private biomedical events. They are deeply social processes. I've been to several births myself. They are deeply social. They are collaborative. Everyone is invited, except the adult men. They are not invited, but all the women in the camp are there. All the children are there. There's so much reverence in the process. Community care provides emotional reassurance, practical support, cultural continuity, particularly during challenging times. So even now, as the community is undergoing significant transition, as they're undergoing nutrition transition, as much of the land that they can access is depleting, as they are losing access to resources, this is really true. This cultural continuity is still there, is still salient part of the community. It also provides relational security and structural support. So even when an infant is in the womb, they are getting supported by their community, because it's really challenging for a mother to forage when she is in her third trimester. And so even from the point that they are in the womb, they are relying on their community for nourishment and assistance. Next slide. Here are just some pictures of some of the foods that are targeted. The upper left is a woman who is wearing a leather skin, and she has a digging stick in her hand, and it's the rainy season. It's very green. And that digging stick is a stick that has a very sharp tip at the end, and it is to dig what are referred to as tubers, which are sort of like a potato, but they're really fibrous. So imagine a potato with the texture potentially of like a very stringy piece of celery. Some of them are less fibrous. There are many different species, but they're underground storage organs. They hold water for the plants, and they will dig into the dirt to obtain a lot of these roots. The bottom left is a picture of a man using a bow and arrow. They do shoot larger game with poison-tipped arrows. Small and medium-sized game are there. This looks like a bird arrow. I can't see very closely, but the smaller and medium-sized game are not hunted with poison-tipped arrows, with both wood and metal tipped arrows. The upper right is a picture of a gentleman smoking out a beehive of African killer bee honey, which they call ba'alako, but that is a very, very big piece of comb. He is about 25 feet up in the air in a very large baobab tree. And the picture on the lower right is a woman pounding a fruit called baobab. So if any of you have access to a Whole Foods or something called Amazon, right? Any internet shop you can usually buy them on, baobab is now considered one of the newest superfruits. And so if you're interested to taste it, it's really high in vitamin C. It's extremely nutritious. You can try a baobab superfruit chew, and you will sort of taste the baobab that the Hadza are eating. They're eating it sort of raw directly from the source, as you see there. And baobab trees are not yet domesticated. So all of the baobab that the world is consuming is essentially being harvested from wild trees. So they will take all of the seeds out, they will pound the powdery fruit and the seed together. So what they're consuming also is very lipid rich. It also has some fat and other micronutrients in it, typically that your superfood chew at the supermarket in the North Atlantic context does not have. Next slide, please. I would like to let everyone know that there are animal remains on the next slide, just to let you know in case you would like to look away. So I wanted to bring your attention. I can't resist. I can't resist. I can't help myself to how productive Hadza children are because they are active members of the food economy. And I have argued for a number of years throughout my work, throughout the corpus of my work, that these early experiences of communal care, these early experiences of food sharing, are really formative and they represent structural supports of Hadza society. And it's what you see children born into and what you start seeing them replicate and manifest throughout their childhood. There are differences. There are differences that you get in middle childhood, sort of that 8 to 10 range, when all of the sort of social norms of your group are coming online. There are some things that look a little different in middle childhood from later adolescence, but for the most part, what you see is this ethos of distributed care and sharing and taking care of one another that really starts from infancy and continues throughout the life cycle. And there's a picture of that's actually a mom on the upper left. That's a newish mom, and she is eating a tuber in her mouth. She is peeling the tuber. The baby cannot eat that tuber. The baby is still breastfeeding. But the baby can play with the tuber. The baby can sort of suck on the tuber, be around the food, be around sort of the exchange of food. It's similar to what's happening often in a lot of context here in the North Atlantic sort of context of infant-led weaning. So hunter-gatherers are the first ones who ever introduced the concept of infant-led weaning. Infant-led weaning. Yeah. Next slide, please. So who do children share food with? This is just to demonstrate that this really is fundamental to their own development. You can see in the graph there, it's sort of a log of calories shared versus age. As they get older, they are sharing more. So as their ability to collect food increases, right? As their skills sharpen, they're going to be sharing more food with their compatriots, with their families. We also see children who, for a variety of reasons, are sort of, they have dependence of their own. So in situations where their parents have been injured or their parents have mental health challenges that would preclude them from being highly productive foragers, you often have the teenagers, the tweens and early teens doing a lot of care for their younger siblings, and they will even ratchet up productivity even further in those contexts. The second figure you see is just, oh, that's fine. They're essentially network analyses. All they're demonstrating is that kids share their food widely and often. Okay, next slide. So cooperative childbearing, what are the benefits to children? Hadza children, so essentially an infant, if you take the infant as the focal unit of analysis, there are a large constellation of helpers. We did a study a number of years ago where we looked at infants in their first year of life, and we found that almost 14, in many instances, almost 14 individuals are holding an infant on a daily basis. Many of these are children. They are learning to parent, they are expanding their social circle, they are gaining greater emotional intelligence and greater adaptability to all sorts of social environments. And sometimes, you know, these babies look pretty big tied on to their friends or siblings' back. And in this instance, she had gone, the young girl who's carrying the baby, her cousin, had gone to collect berries. So she's holding some sort of dried out berry bushes in addition to her little young relative. Next slide. What are the benefits to the adults? Well, parents experience reduced stress and improved mental health. So moms talk about how amazing it is to actually have this support network available. There are expanded social networks. There's emotional buffering through community, and there's psychological resilience is socially scaffolded. So again, you're sort of baking this into the social structure that this cooperative child rearing is really fundamental to the fabric of Hadza society. And everyone really cares for infants. It really is a village that is raising each one of these children. Next slide. Survival really is a shared project, and I will talk about one other study just because I think it is a really interesting one. Before I lead into it, I will point out that a Hadza person is rarely alone, and this would have been true in our evolutionary past as well. We are a highly social species. It's one of the things that has really characterized us as a species. Whether this is an effort, an foraging effort, right? Whether they are out foraging, although men do hunt alone, whether they are giving birth, whether they are dying, whether they are at rest, or even when they are in danger. very rarely is a person alone. And even if a man is hunting alone, he cannot carry all of the meat from a kill back. So even if he is alone when he shoots the animal, even when he tracks the animal, although they often take parties out to track, the fact of getting most of that large game animal back to camp becomes a cooperative process as well. Co-sleeping is also standard, where families sleep. And my colleagues and I have done several studies on co-sleeping, not only among the Hadza, but in several groups around the world, including in the US and Canada. And sleeping patterns are really flexible. Another study that I'll highlight here is referred to as the sentinel hypothesis. So by sleeping in close proximity and by maintaining what they refer to in the science of sleep literature is called staggered wakefulness, the Hadza are reducing individual vulnerability and they share the burden of this nighttime vigilance. So my colleagues and I referred to this, we named this the sentinel hypothesis. We did a very large sleep study, and one of the things we looked at was by putting actigraph watches on everyone, we could see when people were awake and when they were sleeping. And at any given point in a Hadza camp, and you see some pictures of a typical Hadza camp there, dry season on the top, rainy season on the bottom. At any given point in time, you don't have everyone asleep at the same time. And this really does mean that there are folks awake, maintaining sort of eyes on the community at all hours of the night. Next slide. We also have normalized reciprocity, which I've talked about a bit with distributed food sharing and also in child rearing. This offers a deep sense of purpose and belonging. It's something that is articulated by the community as sort of characteristic of being a hunter-gatherer and characteristic of Hadza. This community focus really does protect against precarity. Children are integrated, they're affirmed, and they grow into adults who are needed across the lifespan. So they are born into this environment and they then turn around and raise their children in the same environment. Next slide. So what can we learn from the Hadza? What can we take away from this? So in terms of evolutionary significance, if we think about the environments in which our species evolved, and we know that it is very similar to it's about as similar as we're going to get. The Hadza are not a proxy, they are not a model of our evolutionary past, but there are elements of their society that are just about as close as we're going to be able to get in 2025. So it offers us a really good opportunity to ask some pertinent questions about what we think we can learn from them about our evolutionary past. And one of them is that ancestral support networks were key to our evolutionary success. And we really believe that this is the case based not only on the human evolutionary biology data that I gave you in the beginning about how females of our species really are biologically different than other mammals and other primates, but that also we see how important these networks are across all small scale societies, across all hunter gatherers. It's not just the Hadza. This is ubiquitous amongst foraging groups. Shared space and mutual reliance lead to cooperation and well-being distributed across relationships. So they're living in very close proximity with one another. You see a beautiful picture of a Hadza camp there. Children are playing in the middle. If you can see, there's these green bags on the ground, and there's some children playing on these green bags. Just to add some juxtaposition, just so that we are not romanticizing what forager lifestyle is in the 21st century, those are bags of maize that have been donated by nonprofit and government organizations because they're still dealing with reduced access to land. Climate change is really impacting access to resources. They really have diminished resources right now, and so they do get some supplements from outside sources. What else we can take away essentially is that tightly knit communities like the Hadza are essential to human well-being and that cooperation characterized our evolutionary past. Next slide. So when I say reclaiming the village, I mean, what does this tell us in our own lives? What can we take away from this as something that maybe we can think about as something that we can sort of take some of these lessons and some of what the Hadza have taught us and sort of put it into our own daily framing. I have argued across a number of publications that we need to reposition childbirth and we need to reposition child rearing in our society as shared responsibilities. I argue that we need to start funding home birth, postpartum doulas, and paid family leave after the birth of a child. I have also argued that we need to stop shaming co-sleeping and rather we need to expand the dialogue to include safe practices so that families know how to safely engage in co-sleeping rather than pathologizing it. The US is one of the only countries we are one of the only countries that shames co-sleeping. So by sheer numbers alone, in terms of the numbers of human beings on the planet, co-sleeping is the normative practice that we engage in. It is typically Americans who tend to be the outliers in terms of moving away from this practice. We need to normalize extended kin and non-kin caregiving. And I have argued very vocally, including when it's paid. So this would be for things like daycare and nannying, that we need to normalize my daughter, you may have heard my dogs barking. My daughter just came home from seventh grade and she came home from the babysitter. So I am able to give this talk to you right now this afternoon because I have an allo mother in the house right now taking care of my seventh grader. And so we really need to normalize this extended caregiving because it really is foundational to our species. And it's time to start talking about it publicly. Next slide. And that is it for me. That will do it in terms of the slides I have to share. I would be remiss if I did not thank the Hadza community. Nube'ea is the Hadzane word for thank you. I have listed many of my collaborators there. I have listed my funding sources on the bottom of the slide. And the collaborators who were integral to the particular papers and projects I talked about today, their photos are there on the slide. I would also like to encourage you to go visit olanakwe.org. Olanakwe is the Hadzane word for children, and Olanakwe is a mutual aid organization that is a collaboration between members of the Hadza community and anthropologists who have worked with them for extended periods of time. And it is an initiative directed by the community that supports educational sovereignty. As I am talking to educators who understand that education is the key that sets you free. I wanted to point out that the number one thing that the community is currently asking for by way of assistance is support so that they can send the children, the families who want to send their children to primary and even secondary school can do so. They increasingly are losing land rights. They are losing the ability to advocate for resources on their own land because if they are not literate and they don't speak English, they're not invited to the table. So they are actively working on education as the key to secure land rights and to maintain their current way of life. Also, they want to open up additional pathways for children who want to pursue equally worthy pathways of leaving the bush and getting an education and continuing on. So please take a look, Olanakwe Community Fund. And I think I am ready for questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Alyssa, for an excellent presentation. And yes, as the coordinator for the Center for Inquiry, I can confirm that you will be speaking again for us in the future about childhood and childhood cooperation. We have been doing webinars, like I said, for several years. TIES was the first sister organization, and we started back in 2015. We have presented to over 350 workshops for teachers in person to all 50 states. And webinars is just one aspect of TIES. We have a couple of very exciting webinars coming up, but this is only a fraction of what we will be offering this school year. You can go to tieseducation.org to get the full webinar schedule, and you can also access all of our resources. We are very active on Facebook, and our YouTube channel posts all of our past webinars as well as different playlists. So if you're teaching about human evolution, about natural selection, we have all those different playlists to meet your curriculum. We have full units for middle school and high school in both English and Spanish. Everything is editable. So we have PDFs, but we also have PowerPoints and Word documents. Almost all activities come with a teacher lesson plan in case you have to submit that to your admin. We have things, like I mentioned, the full units, but then we also broke them down into hands-on investigations, videos, online games, and different resources. We had 14 teachers from across the country write a book on teaching evolution. And right now, it's the start of the school year, we're having a buy one, get one sale. So we want you to buy a book and then gift it to your favorite science teacher, or you could put it in your school's library. So that's TIES. You can learn more about that at tieseducation.org. But we also have Science Saves for K through 12 educators. Science touches all of us, from vaccines that save to discoveries that shape our world. Join Science Saves in celebrating National Science Appreciation Day. We started this campaign a few years ago. You can get involved by signing the petition encouraging high school seniors to enter our $10,000 scholarship. We've been doing this for several years, and we've funded first prize is 10,000, second prize is 5,000, and then we have third, fourth, and fifth prize. And quote, all they have to do is make a 30-second video about how science has improved their life or somebody that they know. All of our resources are NGSS aligned, and you can learn more by going to sciencesaves.org. If you want to see if your state is celebrating science, you can also go to that website. And if they're not, you can sign a petition to get your governor to participate. TIES is all about science, where science saves. Yes, of course, we appreciate science, but we also are in all of the different curriculum. We have elementary, middle school, and high school, but we also have lessons for language arts teachers, math teachers, arts. Then the last program I want to tell you about is Generation Skeptics, and we are here to help students figure out the onslaught of information that's coming at them. We want them to be able to decipher misconceptions, and we want them to be critical thinkers. We want them to be media literate. And you might be thinking, why do students need to be able to figure out and navigate fake news in the year 2025? Well, go to generationskeptics.org to learn more. And we have lots of free lessons. Like I said, everything is free, 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 free. Okay, thank you, Alyssa, for that brief commercial. Bertha Vasquez, the director of the Center for Inquiry's education section, says she has been to Mountain View. Okay, Bertha adds, clearly our own social isolation, especially in old age, can affect our well-being. Has anything in Hardy's books been reconsidered or proven wrong, incomplete, or updated?
I can take all of those. So let's do the first one. Yes. So thank you for that. That is absolutely true. And the data are really robust, regardless of what population we find this in, whether this is in hunter-gatherers or whether this is in really highly densely populated urban dwelling communities in big cities. We know now that social isolation very much sort of bookending your life, whether that's in childhood or in old age, very severely affects well-being in a negative way. So yes, 100%. And it's not just data coming out of anthropology or sort of human evolutionary biology. These are data that are coming out of all sorts of social sciences research in general and biomedical research as well. We are a highly social species, and it is in the fabric of our species. And so yes, isolation is not ideal. It's one of the all we need to do is look at sort of what was happening just a handful of years ago when folks were isolated, and we're still seeing the impacts of that. And I'm sure many of you are still seeing the impacts of that in your classrooms with children who had social isolation like that for the first time. So moving
Bertha
on to the,
says,
oh,
yeah, what are your future plans? Will you visit other groups in maybe African countries?
so first I'll deal with Herdy's books. Yes, her books have been reconsidered across a wide variety of disciplines, and so far nothing has been proven wrong. I would say some things are incomplete because we didn't have the same amount of data that we have now. So what we have found essentially is that this model of distributed childcare tends to be the norm for human societies, and now we see that across a wider variety. So if anything, it's gained momentum. Um, it's gained momentum. So, what are my future plans? Well, that's a great question. I am currently working on a large community-based collaborative project with hunter-gatherers from all over the world and anthropologists who work with them and collaborate with them. And we are the next kind of installment, the next iteration of this very large collaborative project has to do with, and this is so relevant for this group, so I'm so glad this question was asked. It has to do with hunter-gatherer education and with educational sovereignty that communities all around the world sort of how they would like their own traditional knowledge embedded into the traditional sort of government-based school system and what that looks like across a variety of ecosystems. So yes, the answer is I will hopefully be going to Namibia in the next few years.
Very cool. Dr. Jennifer Velvo, who did a TIES webinar many years ago, and she's encouraged to do another one, asks, what is the mean age of onset for menopause, age of sexual maturity, and overall life expectancy for this tribe? She did come 5 minutes late, but you didn't answer all of those things. Have they provided any insight into the grandmother hypothesis? And I
So
don't know if
great
this is
question.
related to killer whales, but for like the first half of your presentation, all I kept thinking about was killer whales.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will start with the last question first because I think it frames all of it. So we in my discipline, we often associate an anthropologist from the University of Utah named Kristen Hawkes with the grandmother hypothesis. But elements of the grandmother hypothesis have existed far outside of the human condition, far outside of human species. And there are other folks who also sort of introduced concepts of the grandmother hypothesis, not as fleshed out or articulated as clearly before Kristen Hawkes. But I say all of this because Kristen is really an absolute, she did foundational work in this space. I mean, truly foundational work. And she collected her data among the Hadza in the 1980s. So they have not only provided insight, they're the population that sort of kicked it all off in human evolutionary biology. The mean age of onset for menopause is changing. Yeah, so fantastic question, Dr. Balbo. Thank you. You really set me up well for that one. So the mean age of onset for menopause, sexual maturity, and age at first birth are all changing. So they are all so essentially the age. So we're seeing younger and younger moms. And we're seeing girls hit puberty and start menstruation at younger age. Anywhere from so just kind of like what's happening here in the US. The right now I have a doctoral student who's a postdoc in public health now, who did her dissertation on this. And we think that this is largely tethered to massive changes in diet and lifestyle. So increased sedentism and changes in diet are changing these. But in terms of menopause, it tends to be in the early 50s. And sexual maturity is lower. It tends the sort of we are now starting to see, depends on what you mean by sexual maturity. We are now starting to see, I guess if I just use it as you posed it, sexual maturity around middle school age now. Although the vast majority of we don't have as many teen pregnancies as we do in North Atlantic context in the post-industrialized West, but there are some teen pregnancies, absolutely. And for the Hadza, it used to be around 16, 17, 18 in there, and they tend to partner with their age mates. And I think that's an important part of the story, is that they're partnering with their age mates by and large. And overall life expectancy is increasing because they have increased access to biomedical care now. So overall life expectancy is now on par with the rest of Tanzania for the most part, barring catastrophic accidents. So men still die of sort of catastrophic accidents at a much higher rate. And right now, it is also technically illegal in the country of Tanzania to have a home birth. And so there are a lot of complications around childbirth and what that means if you're in a village system and how you get to the doctor. And so we still, in the country writ large, Tanzania sees a lot of maternal and infant mortality. And hunter-gatherers in general have the highest rates of infant mortality of any populations on Earth.
We have two more questions, but we'll follow up with Jen's question. What is conflict resolution like within the community?
Oh, that's a great question too. I would say what it looks like now versus what it looked like maybe 20 years ago when I started working with the community versus what it looked like in the ethnographic literature at the turn of the last century are probably a bit different. Um, Almost every camp now has, I don't have to say almost, I'm hedging. We just did the project over the summer and we went to a variety of camps close to the village and also deep, deep into the bush. And every camp where we visited, every camp that we surveyed had one cell phone in the camp that they could walk to a village and charge and turn on and sort of get access. So there are also radios. So this isolation isn't really a thing anymore. And so they have access to all sorts of other resources. So they are learning what conflict resolution looks like in terms of the nation state, in terms of other groups, right? They're actually very connected. So it looks like a lot of talking is the short answer. But sort of what informs that dialogue and what resources they're using to bring into that conflict resolution are really informed now by increased interactions with other ethnic groups and with the wider nation state. There is, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that we also now have increases in alcoholism and increases in um, domestic abuse. So that is also entering the community, but at much lower percentages than you would see sort of in the post-industrialized West.
So I mentioned that Jen Velvo did a ties webinar for us many years ago. And now Chris, who does in-person ties presentations to fellow teachers, he has a question, I think, or a statement about elder care. And
Great,
Chris, you're unmuted.
Oh,
great,
hi. Thank you very much. And Kenny, nice to see you in person, by the way. So, yes, I've done some presentations. I had posted in the chat about elder care, and like my wife and I had to take care of her 99-year-old grandmother and her uncle, who was like her mother-in-law, 97 and 98 when the pandemic hit. So that was the only benefit of being a teacher and us being forced to go virtually is because I could be there and I didn't have to be in the classroom and to help do elder care. In between teaching, I'm running making a 97-year-old man change his diapers like that. So it was
right.
um and I see that as a big thing. Matter like my wife is advising people on how to do it now. Like all the questions we didn't have or people couldn't help us out, she kind of solved a lot of problems. She was brilliant with it.
Right.
Um in this type of community, you don't see the isolation with the elders like any of the cultures. In Asian cultures, like you go to dinner, you're going to see three generations at dinner. I think that's one thing we can benefit from, but it's definitely not seen here in the States. um, so is that I assume that's the case, that they're never the elders aren't having to worry about like them just being isolated, and that
Yeah, I really want to thank you for bringing up such a thoughtful point, and asking this because it's often something that I talk about, but very rarely, if ever, have I been asked to talk about this. I usually have to add it on myself. So thank you, Chris. I appreciate that very much. You are absolutely spot on. And so I mentioned that one bullet point in my talk about how important it is for us to think about sort of the negative impacts of social isolation, sort of bookending either, part of your life and that you rarely do anything alone. But what that means in terms of translating to our society, elder care has very deep evolutionary roots, right? This concept of distributed childcare is really a concept of distributed community care. So you really hit the nail on the head there. really understanding elder care and the evolutionary roots in terms of our species, it helps us to understand that it is our cultural construct that this is seen as a burden, that actually elder care is a deeply human and adaptive feature of our social and biological lives. And if we look to foraging in small scale societies, we see that elders often remain integrated, respected. They are really, a lot of foraging societies are what we refer to as a gerontocracy, right? We really sort of defer and give a lot of respect to our elders. In most post-industrialized settings in the proverbial West, I don't really even know why we say West, but sort of in what we think about, sort of in the US typical American context, for instance. Although this is not necessarily true, right? Because we have so many multi-generational households. But in a lot of industrialized settings, what we see is that aging is socially isolating. What we see in the US in particular is that we are more of what's called a neontocracy. We care very much about youth, vitality. We care very much about focusing a lot of our energy and resources on children, which makes, that is a cultural choice we are making. But living in a gerontocracy versus a neontocracy really means the things we highlight and the things we put forward as a society to focus on and talk about are very different. And so I really just want to thank you for that. But I think the underlying thing here is that elder care may also reflect sort of this coevolution of social norms, right? So as we became more dependent on one another as a species, as hominins became more dependent on cooperation, abandoning elders would really undermine reputations, would undermine trust. We are also what's referred to as central place provisioners, and this is really unique to other species, right? So even when our species was evolving, had a central place. We would leave to forage, come back to the central place. This actually not only affords for elders to have a place to be cared for, but remember, moms were stacking their infants. So you have toddlers. I don't know if anyone has tried to carry a 3-year-old for a long period of time, but it's excruciating and it's extremely challenging. So if you have to take a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old and an infant out with you foraging, chances are you're probably not going to be super productive, right? So that central place provisioning allows for that. So the same, and I have often seen the most elderly members of a community hanging out at camp with the youngest members of the community. And so I thank you for that because I think that really does give us a full circle picture.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I
All
had
right.
one more, if you don't mind.
Yes.
You mentioned the superfood, the baobab tree. I'm not certain.
Hey, Bob. Yep.
And I have to admit, African American understanding, like my family's raised me to be very aware, and I can greet people in 10 different languages and stuff because my dad spoke Thai when he was in Vietnam, stuff like that. And when my family's from Louisiana, so we're a whole new mix of everything. But when I heard oh, people want it in Whole Foods, and my mind immediately went to this could be a source of exploitation. Let's go there and get that from them. And you mentioned land rights and stuff, and that's how well and how much support do they get from the Tanzanian government, or are they viewed as like a pariah because they're still hunter gatherers?
Oh man, I I'm gonna have to come back multiple times, Kenny, like so many times.
That
Okay, so
sounds good.
short answer, and please feel free, Chris, to email me after this if we don't have time to really get into it. I'll take the baobab part first. So it has been consumed for centuries, right? The Hadza argue that it's been consumed essentially for thousands of years, which makes sense because it's been in the environment for thousands and thousands of years. But we have documented record that baobab fruit has been consumed across the continent of Africa for food. It's also been used for medicinal and cultural purposes. Sort of the rise of it as this superfood in the cultural West has been tethered to it being marketed, as I mentioned, for antioxidants, vitamin C, anti-aging, right? Um, but this has a two-pronged sort of negative effect. Local people are losing affordable access to one of their traditional foods because it's now sort of being commercialized. And also, So that's sort of one thing. There are really unequal economic returns across the continent, right? Because it's a really high markup when you're selling it in the US and Europe. So this is a value chain inequality issue that's part of my political ecology background, but you hit the nail on the head again. And there is this idea that wellness companies are engaging in something called biopiracy. And again, another talk, Kenny, if we want to talk about biopiracy and sort of what it means with particularly in relationship to not only the microbiome, which is its whole own talk, but also in all of these sort of plant-based wellness products that companies abroad come in and take. That's an issue. The environmental sustainability is a big issue because they grow really slowly. They live for hundreds to thousands of years. And right now there's really unsustainable harvesting. There are no regulations. And it's not just in Tanzania, it's across the continent. So as global demand increases, so do the risks that this becomes a really extractive industry. They're over collecting fruit. They're often damaging the trees by overstripping the bark. And this can threaten long-term regeneration of these beautiful giants that you see across that are sort of ubiquitous with the African landscape. So that's one thing. In terms of exploitation of foraging communities, that's a whole nother talk, but I will say my short response to your question is yes, spot on. This is another reason why this particular community is really interested in sort of accessing literacy and basic mathematics and English, which is the language of commerce and decision making in Tanzania, along with Swahili, which they already speak. But this is one of the very specific reasons that they are interested in having education as access to education for their community, because they're hoping that this will reduce exploitation because they have a seat at the table and they understand the decisions that are being made about the resources in their environment.
All right. Thank you, everyone who attended this live. Alyssa Bertha says that this was her favorite webinar of all time out of 5 or so years.
Oh, awesome. And I really want to come back. You guys are great.
And she also added that she did the co-sleeping, and her son just turned 21 and they're still very close.
Great. Thank you for that. And thank you for that compliment. It's my pleasure. I love stuff like this. When Kenny wrote to me, I said yes immediately. I was like, whatever you need, I'm here for it. And yeah, co-sleeping is a whole nother domain of my research we could talk about, but I'm delighted to hear that you co-slept. I co-slept with my daughter, and most of the world co-sleeps. So I just want to normalize that right here in this space.
Okay, so you get lots of thank yous, and they are looking forward to seeing your future talks by you. Thank you, Alyssa.
Great. Thank you for having me.